Zodiac follows Robert Graysmith, a cartoonist working for the San Francisco Chronicle who becomes obsessed with the Zodiac killer case. Graysmith becomes an amateur detective determined to track down the killer who is terrorizing Northern California. The film is based on Graysmith's book, titled Zodiac, and the tagline for the film reads, "The shocking true story of America's most elusive serial killer." The case of the Zodiac has been one of the longest-running open cases in American history, and will likely forever remain unsolved. Graysmith himself said that Zodiac fascinates us all because he didn't just possess a few elements of history's serial killers, he possessed them all. Now, this film is often praised for its accuracy to the real-life case, so we're going to delve into the details here and investigate what it gets right and what it doesn't. Now, I feel I have to begin this video with an admission, because I was obsessed with this case as a teenager. I went through a real Jake Gyllenhaal phase, and after I watched Zodiac, I became obsessed with the case myself. I read Robert Graysmith's book, and I pored over case files and news reports and everything I could get my hands on, and I even wrote an essay for an A-level project, so we're talking obsessed here. I was basically a resident on ZodiacKiller.com, and I still even check the website periodically now. So yeah, I'm a little bit obsessed with this case. Now, this film begins fairly case-heavy, showing the crimes and the media madness that followed them, centered mostly around the San Francisco Chronicle, but it takes a later turn focusing on Graysmith himself and his obsession with the case. And this is perhaps where we lose some accuracy, but we'll get onto that later. Director David Fincher, alongside screenwriter James Vanderbilt and producer Bradley J. Fisher, spent 18 months conducting research into the case. They interviewed witnesses, surviving family members, suspects, retired and active investigators, the only two surviving victims, and the mayors of San Francisco and Vallejo. And I think it really shows on screen that so much time and care went into getting a lot of these details right. And credit here also has to go to the art department on this film because it feels so real to the time period based on the sets, and the props and costumes were also meticulously recreated from forensic evidence that was lent to production. This is David Fincher we're talking about. He's a perfectionist. In an effort to make the film as accurate as possible, David Fincher chose not to show any of the alleged Zodiac murders where there were no surviving victims or witnesses, which I think is a really interesting choice. He's going purely off of real-life accounts and not dramatizing what we can't know for sure. And this is why the film begins with the July 4th attack instead of the Lake Herman Road murders, since there were no survivors to corroborate any details. Another bit of perfectionism from Fincher is he apparently had trees helicoptered into the Lake Berryessa location due to the dramatic change in the area since the attack in 1969, and he wanted the scene to be as accurate as possible. In one of Zodiac's letters, he threatened to kill a school bus full of children, which obviously created panic. Fincher claims to actually remember his school bus being escorted by a police car when he was 7 years old himself. Another win for this film is that the Zodiac is not played by a single actor. He's portrayed by 3 separate actors, Richmond Arquette, Bob Stevenson, and John Lacey, and their faces are purposefully obscured or out of focus when Zodiac is on screen. This is to highlight the differing reports of Zodiac's appearance and build at the various crime scenes. This film really excels at showing Robert Graysmith's obsession with the case. I read and reread his book many times while I was writing my essay, and you just feel his obsession through those pages. Jake Gyllenhaal plays Graysmith really well. You watch him just become consumed by the Zodiac, and I think this film really shows what an impact the case had on his life. His personal and family life suffered heavily because of his obsession, and the film doesn't hide away from that. When I was writing my essay at school, I reached out to Graysmith himself and asked him if he could describe the impact the Zodiac had on his life in just a few sentences, and the email I received back said, "The case made me more dedicated and observant and spurred me to harness my art and writing skills to make a change in the physical world as much as I did with my political cartoons. With Zodiac, I was writing about obsessed officers, the sanctity of human life, and the need for us all to make a difference in the world. Most of all, it taught me to follow through and never give up." In one of the most tense scenes in the film, we see Graysmith go to the home of a man who claims to know Rick Marshall, one of the Zodiac suspects. Graysmith goes in search of film canisters that may contain footage of a Zodiac murder. Graysmith asks this man about the posters that Rick Marshall drew that had a resemblance to Zodiac's handwriting. This man then corrects Graysmith by telling them that he drew the posters, not Rick Marshall. Graysmith, rightfully so, gets pretty freaked out and leaves, especially after hearing footsteps in the house when he was told it was just the pair of them in the house. According to Graysmith, this all actually happened, and some investigators who worked the case believe this man and Marshall may have been working together. The film, however, doesn't delve much deeper into Marshall as a suspect. Where this film loses its footing a bit is the relationship between Graysmith and the Chronicle's crime reporter Paul Avery, who's played by Robert Downey Jr. Of course, the pair did both work at the Chronicle in real life, but the film suggests they had a much closer relationship than in reality. The pair didn't officially really connect until after Graysmith published his book. Avery was named by the Zodiac as a potential target, so it's definitely an important character to the story, but his characterization is largely dramatized in the film. The film also depicts Avery as becoming a recluse, still obsessed with the case and becoming really ill. And since the release of the film, this has been refuted by people close to Avery, as he went on to cover other major crime stories after leaving the Chronicle. It makes for good cinema, but it loses some points on the accuracy meter. The film also proposes that Graysmith solved the 340 cipher, but his proposed solution was widely considered invalid and was essentially forced, making the message read more like poetry than anything substantial, and this cipher was eventually cracked in 2020. Mark Ruffalo portrayed investigator David Toschi in this film, and in preparation for his role, Ruffalo met with the real Toschi to pick his brain and found that Toschi had a perfect recall of every detail of the case. And Ruffalo's wardrobe in this might seem a bit eccentric, but that's really how Toschi looked back in the day. He had style. This film strongly suggests that Arthur Lee Allen is the Zodiac, and it was Robert Graysmith's firm belief. It does make sense though, since this is based on Graysmith's book, and Allen was his favourite suspect. And I personally do also kind of subscribe to the belief that it was Allen. Another bit of Hollywood flourish comes during the scene when Graysmith comes face to face with Allen. They did meet in real life, but not how the film portrays it. Graysmith described the real encounter during an interview with Rope of Silicon. I'm following him around in an orange VW Rabbit, and I park outside of an Ace Hardware, and obviously he's seen me from the big window, and so I'm parked and he pulls alongside me so I can't get my door open, and he gives me this look like you wouldn't believe. Further proving his pure obsession with the case, Graysmith reportedly sent friends into the hardware store to buy things and try and obtain a handwriting sample from Allen. This man is obsessed. Graysmith's book is considered comprehensive in terms of detail, but is often criticised for its accuracy in general, seemingly prioritising a compelling narrative over verified facts. Many critics have noticed a lot of factual errors in terms of the geography of the cases, even including weather report inaccuracies. This book and its follow-up Zodiac Unmasked are accused of being biased, as Graysmith was known to ignore evidence that didn't fit his preferred theory of Allen being the Zodiac. There is DNA and fingerprint evidence that has excluded Allen from consideration in the past, but Graysmith doesn't really acknowledge this. Towards the end of the film, we have an interview with Michael Mageau, who is one of the survivors of the Zodiac, and he picks Allen's photo out of a lineup, claiming it's the closest match to what he remembers. In reality, Mageau said he couldn't be certain because when he was attacked, he was shot at close range and disoriented by a bright light. Police didn't consider this identification to be particularly valid evidence because his eyewitness account was pretty fuzzy. The other survivor, Brian Hartnell, was initially not happy about this film being made, but after he met with Fincher, he changed his mind. He spent some time as an advisor on set and admitted it was emotionally draining to think back to what happened to him. He found the movie itself too difficult to watch, but said the following: "I knew that sooner or later someone was going to tell this story again, so you want to put it in the hands of someone you trust. David wants to get it right, that's all you can ask a person." He was also impressed by Fincher's recreation of the Lake Berryessa attack. He went to the same spot on the lake on the same day it happened. Hartnell actually appears as an extra alongside his wife in the background of the scene where Marty Lee suggests to Toschi that he should take some time off of work. Obviously, the film doesn't come to any satisfying conclusion about who the Zodiac was, because we unfortunately didn't get that conclusion in real life either. The film simply leaves you feeling suspicious and just with this sinking feeling. And I'm sure the folks who pored over the case for years and years still have a yearning to find out who the Zodiac was, and maybe one day we will find out. Interestingly, this film actually resulted in the case being reopened due to a huge spike in public interest. Overall, the film is really accurate to Graysmith's book and is mostly about Graysmith's relationship with the case as opposed to being a very intense dive into the actual police hunt for Zodiac. There are a lot of claims that Graysmith's book is biased, and thus a film based on the book is going to be a bit biased too as a result, since a lot of Graysmith's ideas and theories are presented as fact. Considering that and looking at how much time and care went into researching the case to bring this film to life, I'm going to give Zodiac an accuracy rating of B.
God damn it.
If you're interested in hearing about the accuracy of a film claiming to be based on a true story, check out the video linked on your screen right now. Otherwise, we cover all sorts of horror and thriller stuff, from breakdowns of how your favourite horror films got made, to comparisons between horror books and their film adaptations. If that sounds up your street, why not subscribe and check them out? Thanks so much for watching and supporting our channel.